Ah, yes, the Pokemon anime. For many, this was one of those staple childhood shows that everyone you knew would watch and talk about. And for others...
Now, just to get this out of the way now, I do have plenty of good memories from watching this show, and as a child, I legitimately enjoyed it. However, looking back on it nowadays, there's quite a lot about it that really doesn't work as well as we thought it did. I don't think it's a bad show for the most part, just not something I would consider amazing. And yet we remember it so fondly. Perhaps it's because its world was so engaging and inviting. Possibly it's because kids are easily entertained. But if an animated series can keep an audience for nearly 20 years and counting, it has to have done something right. So what the heck, let's take a look back at this generally okay show and try to sift out some of the, well, I can't exactly say diamonds in the rough, that's kind of unfair. More like diamonds in the water? I mean, water's good and all, it's just not particularly interesting. I can do analogies. Hocus Pokemon. I actually had no memory of this episode prior to making this list. I only found out about it while I was looking through forums gathering ideas for candidates. But despite only seeing it, or at least remembering seeing it a short time ago, this turned out to be a solid, funny episode that I really think holds up. The episode begins with Ash, Misty, and Brock running into a new character named Lily, a self-proclaimed Pokemon magician. She tells them about a spell she's been working on that no other magician has been able to complete, and the gang agree to help her gather the necessary ingredients. These include yogurt made from the milk of a Miltank, a Parasect's stun spore, the ground-up horn of a Stantler, and at this point I'm surprised they didn't go all out and give Lily 2 sisters.
Eye of Newton, toe of frog, wool of bat, and tongue of dog.
Anyway, they chase after an Aipom to get the final ingredient, but Team Rocket comes in and steals everything, like they tend to do. After a hilarious montage of them trying to get Aipom to shed a tear for the potion, trust me, that's not as disturbing as it sounds, the gang come back, fend off Team Rocket, and get Aipom to laugh so hard that they get the tear they were after. Like most episodes, the plot is very simple and not very noteworthy, but the episode sticks out thanks to its above-average humor. Lily is fun and just eccentric enough to be charming, the references are neat and don't distract from the action, and each member of Team Rocket gets a short yet very comical scene that adds just one more facet to their already endearing personalities. Who knew Meowth was a Takahata fan? I think the reason why this episode is so well remembered, though, is the ending. After Lily finally gets all the ingredients for the spell, Ash volunteers to be the first to test it. As you might expect, something goes wrong and the spell doesn't quite have the intended effect. But what you might not expect is this.
This is awesome! I'm a Pikachu!
Electric Shock Showdown. The first season is easily the most well-remembered out of the entire show, but if you ask me, it was also the season that had the most problems. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it was bad, it just hadn't quite found its groove yet, and the lack of experience shows in quite a few areas. The redundant dialogue, the stilted animation, constantly getting facts wrong, as well as a lot of plots that, in hindsight, were pretty ridiculous, even for a fantasy setting like this. That being said, Season 1 did occasionally pull off an episode so well that it can still hold its own against the newcomers, even without the rose-colored glasses, as is the case with this one. This episode begins with Ash and company arriving in Vermilion City to challenge the gym leader, Lieutenant Surge, or LT Surge as I used to call him. After seeing a whole Pokemon Center filled with the casualties of Surge's gym, Ash sends out his own Pikachu to battle Surge's much more powerful Raichu. And Raichu wins easily. Like, not even winded easily. Back at the Pokemon Center, Nurse Joy presents Ash with a Thunderstone, a chance to evolve Pikachu in an effort to challenge Surge again with a more powerful Pokemon. However, doing so would change Pikachu's personality unpredictably and permanently. There's a really nice, honest moment here where both Ash and Pikachu consider all the options at their disposal and all the consequences of each choice. Ultimately, they decide that he shouldn't have to stoop to Surge's tactics in order to defeat him, and using his strategy of evolving Pokemon early against him, Ash manages to earn his first gym badge properly. In my opinion, this was the episode that transitioned Pokemon from a fun little show for kids to one that had some actual significance. It was the first real example of character development in the series for Ash and Pikachu, and it knew the right points to hit to make a long-lasting favorite. It's still not exempt from the problems that plagued Season 1, but for what it did right, this episode more than deserves a mention. Hello Pomelo, and enter the Dragonite, an epic two-part saga to cap off the main storyline of the Orange Islands. I'm just going to say right now that I think the Orange Islands is the best season of the whole anime. It came at a crucial point where a lot of the original issues were ironed out, yet the original drive and inspiration still remained. It may have been a rather short season, but I really admire all the creativity that went into it, even having to build an entire new region from the ground up just for the show. And sure, a lot of people don't like Tracy, but I really didn't mind him too much. Anyway, like I said, these two episodes weren't quite the final episodes of the season, but they serve as a neat little climax to the main plot. The episodes begin with Ash and company en route to battle the champion, Drake, when they spy a strange silhouette flying across the sea. It turns out to be Drake's Dragonite, a Pokemon so strong that because of it, he has remained undefeated in the gym. Team Rocket shows up briefly, but honestly they're more of an afterthought in this episode. The real focus is on this amazing 6v6 battle between Ash and Drake. Drake's team features some of the most versatile and formidable Pokemon that Kanto has to offer, and it's safe to say that Ash's team is at a disadvantage. But surprisingly, Ash actually gains the lead early and holds on to it for a good while, wisely utilizing type advantages and each of his Pokemon's unique abilities. Eventually, Ash manages to whittle Drake down to just his Dragonite, much to the surprise of everyone, but then things start to turn around. Dragonite begins to sweep Ash's weakened team one by one, until finally only Pikachu is left. Team Rocket makes another 12-second appearance before the final showdown, which brings both Pokemon to their very limit. And finally, Dragonite is the one to fall, finally earning Ash a championship, a feat that would never be repeated again. And yes, after such a disappointing finale to the Pokemon League in Season 1, it's a very cathartic feeling. But the reason I like these episodes so much is not just because Ash won, it's because of how he won. Let's be honest, for the most part, Ash is pretty stupid. He's the kind of character who'll jump into just about anything before thinking it through, and a lot of his biggest victories came about as a result of luck, sheer willpower, or deus ex machina. In this episode, though, that couldn't be any less true. We constantly see him analyzing the field, plotting his strategy to get the best advantage. He utilizes everything he can from type advantages to the terrain itself to ultimately move his Pokemon into a winning position. And on the few occasions when he made a big mistake, he learned from them and used that knowledge to his advantage. It's basically Electric Shock Showdown again, but on a much bigger scale with far less obnoxious padding. Still a little bit there though, there's always a little bit. The Wayward Wobbuffet. This is another one of those episodes I happened upon while searching through forums. The people who posted about it claimed that it was the funniest episode of the entire show. And yeah, they're kind of right. Generally speaking, it's difficult for dub anime to do comedy effectively, especially back near the turn of the millennium. Because of the script having to go through the whole translation and localization process, what might have worked well in the original language will often be misinterpreted, misdirected, or mistimed. Thankfully, this has gotten much better with more recent dubs, but at the time this episode was released, it was a very noticeable problem. So I feel that it really does deserve to be recognized when a dub of that era can pull off something of this caliber. This episode begins with Team Rocket attempting to capture Pikachu once again. They trap him inside an indestructible box and hand off the key to Jesse's Wobbuffet. Shenanigans ensue, and now all of them are making a mad dash to get the key back, only for Murphy to come down with his mighty gavel every step of the way. To be honest, there isn't a lot for me to talk about with this episode because it's just really funny and not a lot else. It has great slapstick, it has good wit, and it even has a couple of nice character moments. But there's little else to actually talk about with this one, aside from the appearance of a crime lord whose accent manages to encompass every nationality known to mankind.
I'm not giving to anybody back this wobbledygook, lady.
We are not robbers, we are pirates!
However, I'm not going to act like it's perfect. For one thing, the comedy could have been paced throughout the episode a little better. I mean, the second act has jokes coming at you in buckets, but in the third act it seems they only try to do a few. It's not technically a problem, but the sudden drop is kind of distracting. Also, the script really could have used some fine-tuning in places. Just as an example, try and guess how many times Wabba is spoken in this episode, both by the Pokemon itself and the humans. The answer? 111 times. In a 20-minute long episode, that equates to about one utterance of Waba every 11 seconds. Yeah, I know Wobbuffet is at the center of this episode's plot, but that's just poor writing no matter how you slice it. But still, on the whole, this episode succeeded in entertaining me, which is the most important factor at the end of the day. Coming Full Festival Circle. If you ask me, the introduction of the Diamond and Pearl saga is where the show really took a nosedive. I mean, it was never spectacular, but this saga in particular made a lot of jarring changes to the series that, for the most part, did not do the show any justice. I didn't like many of the new characters they introduced, as well as the way they represented old ones. I didn't like the generally more toned-down storylines, and I really didn't like the shift away from the show's Eastern roots in favor of a more Western tone and style. These are changes that I feel negatively impacted the show for quite some time, and has only recently started to be changed back. However, one thing that this saga did right that I don't think anyone can deny was the massive leap in animation quality. Suddenly, the characters were allowed to move more freely and the worlds gained a lot more detail. Battling now had a lot more possibilities at its disposal, leading to some of the greatest visual spectacles to ever come out of the show. But I think the area that benefited most from this upgrade was the Pokemon contests. The new animation style really allowed the creativity and beauty of the contests to be fully realized. Back in Advanced Generation, the contests often ended up as filler episodes, but thanks to some significantly improved animation direction, they became the episodes to look forward to the most. All of them are great, but Coming Full Festival Circle is easily my favorite of the bunch. This episode covers the semi-final round of a massive contest tournament, where Zoe faces Nando and Dawn faces Jessalina. In the first battle, Nando sends out a Lopunny and a Kricketune against Zoe's Miss Magius and Leafeon, and the following 10 minutes hosts some of the most beautiful animation that the show has ever put out. All the colors and the lighting effects and the camera angles come together and put on one hell of a spectacle. It constantly ups the ante with new and creative attack combinations, and you really have to give credit to how much sheer effort went into making this whole scene. The following battle between Dawn and Jessalina is comparatively disappointing, but in regards to the big picture, I really don't feel like it's that much of a loss. The whole thing is amazing, but I think my favorite part has to be when Miss Magius uses its Psywave attack to give Leafeon a pair of holographic wings. I got my wings before it was hipster. Princess vs. Princess. Do you guys remember the episode Beauty and the Beach? You know, the episode that got banned for suggestive sexual themes and the promotion of negative female stereotypes in a children's cartoon? To put it simply, this episode sort of feels like an apology for that one. I have no way of proving that, especially since both of these episodes aired in Season 1, but Princess vs. Princess seems to go out of its way to take every problem with Beauty and the Beach and fix it, while at the same time adding its own unique elements. This episode begins with Misty and Jessie basking in the joys of the Princess Festival, an annual celebration where women can enjoy free food, huge shopping discounts, special events, and getting to boss men around as they please. The episode takes a while to sift through nearly every feminine stereotype imaginable before introducing a contest as the main event. At first, everyone thinks it's just a beauty contest, but it turns out to also include a Pokemon battling tournament, the prize being a one-of-a-kind doll collection, and a photograph with a famous heartthrob movie star. So why does this episode fare so much better than Beauty and the Beach? Well, for one thing, it's context. The stereotypes are still there for sure, but this episode handles them in a much more respectful light. In other words, it actually addresses them for what they are instead of trying to pass them off as complete truths, unlike Beauty and the Beach, which flat out stated that the most important aspect of a woman is her appearance. Granted, some women may feel that way about themselves, but there are a lot of women in the world, and trying to apply that remark to all of them is pretty insensitive. In addition, this episode works to recognize the individuals behind the archetypes. For example, both Jessie and Misty really want the prize doll set. Rather than leaving it at just that, this episode takes the time to show that their desire stems from another source other than, "You don't have a Y chromosome, you must enjoy flowers and rainbows and everything pink!" Not to mention that it also takes brief moments to show that girly things don't have to be enjoyed by just girls. It's surprisingly rare to see a cartoon with this demographic play with and debunk stereotypes this successfully. In fact, the only other example I can think of from that time period this came out in is The Fairly Odd Parents. It covers all its bases and manages to do so in a way that feels completely natural to the plot. It's not often that this show really focuses on teaching a worthwhile moral, but when it does, this should be the standard. Or, you could slap a 10-year-old into a swimsuit competition. I'm sure that won't receive any backlash whatsoever. The Mega Evolution Special Series.
Gen 6 is finally getting the anime back on track in terms of direction and style. However, now instead of poor choices and lackluster execution, the show's new problems revolve around its reduced audience. A lot of older fans have gone and moved on from the show, and newer fans just don't seem to be filing in fast enough to replace them. In an effort to counteract this trend, it seems like X and Y have made an effort to keep newer episodes simple, enjoyable, and, most unfortunately of all, consistent. In many respects, that's not a bad goal. However, because of that, there aren't any episodes that really stick out and demand a second viewing. For as much as I've ripped on Season 1 today, it, as well as some of the other earlier seasons, always made big choices, for better or for worse. Nowadays, though, the creators don't really have much choice but to play it safe. Even episodes with brilliant setups like the Cave of Mirrors and the Malamar episodes still end up feeling generic because the creators either aren't willing or aren't able to go the distance with them. At least, that's how it is with the main storyline. Miniseries are a whole nother story. With these, the creators have started to branch out from Ash Ketchum and put more focus on other characters to keep things fresh. And it also seems that because they don't require as much commitment as the main storyline, they've given much more creative freedom, and thus they're able to do much more.
So far, this has resulted in two noteworthy miniseries, Pokemon Origins and the Mega Evolution Specials, which I greatly prefer, mostly because it doesn't rely on Gen 1 or pandering, for the most part. Anyway, this miniseries, currently made up of 3 episodes, ditches Ash in favor of Elan, a rogue of sorts, seeking to learn the secrets of Mega Evolution, while also becoming the strongest Mega Evolving trainer in the world. In Episode 1, him and his Charizard meet up with Marin, the useless comic relief character, and show off the awesomeness of Mega Evolved Pokemon. I mean, if you begin your episode with Mega Absol dueling a Mega Charizard X, it's safe to say that you have my attention. In Episode 2, the pair travel to the Hoenn region, where they meet up with Steven and Lysander. Together, they discover a giant rock said to be the source of all Mega Evolution, while also accidentally summoning Mega Rayquaza. In Episode 3, Primal Groudon and Kyogre show up and everything gets blown up. And in Episode 4, well, we'll just have to wait and see. This miniseries is actually still in progress and hasn't been officially resolved yet, so here's hoping I don't live to regret this choice in the coming months. The intrigue of Mega Evolution is twofold, and this series takes full advantage of both. It really dives into the history of the process and the consequences Mega Evolution could potentially have. But then it also takes plenty of time to show off their coolness. Each individual episode allows at least a couple of new Megas into the spotlight to show off their stuff, including Garchomp, Metagross, and Blastoise. Then they let the brilliant animation and fast-paced action do the rest. I remember a lot of people saying that the climactic battle between Kyogre and Groudon toward the end of the Advanced Generation series was amazing. Well, this battle puts that one to absolute shame.
Kyogre Groudon OTP!
Island of the Giant Pokemon. This is one of the most widely beloved episodes of Season 1, and considering how popular that season was as a whole, that's a pretty prestigious title. I love this episode as well, although I will admit it has some problems. Plus, in all honesty, this episode is probably only so well remembered because of one particular gimmick that is still unique to it even nowadays, but I'll get to that later. Continuing from where the previous episode, Pokemon Shipwreck, left off, a group of Gyarados create a hurricane which sends Ash and company flying some distance to a supposedly deserted island. When they finally wake up, they all discover that they're lost and that many of their Pokemon have separated from them. They set off into the forest to try and find their Pokemon as well as help. But then something really bizarre happens as the episode cuts away from the human characters and opens back up on Pikachu.
Pikachu!
Ah! Reading! Chase it away!
So yeah, in this episode, the Pokemon all communicate with each other, and they're even subtitled for the audience. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty amazing. Aside from some instances where Meowth has translated for them, this is the only time in the show when the Pokemon's language can be understood word for word by the audience. That in itself is a really creative idea, and I'm actually kind of surprised the show hasn't done something like this since. However, a clever idea isn't enough to carry a whole episode. Thankfully, the creators really took time to get this part of the episode down really, really well. So Pikachu, Squirtle, Charmander, Bulbasaur, Ekans, and Koffing all start talking with one another and figuring out how to get back to their trainers. What I find especially interesting about these scenes is how each Pokemon's personality comes through here, and how each one reacts differently to the situation. Pikachu's personality is very similar to Ash's, fitting seeing how they formed such a close bond so quickly. He's very determined and always tries to keep an upbeat attitude to keep others in check. Also fitting since, as Ash's first Pokemon, he's essentially the alpha of the group. Ash first discovered Charmander waiting on a large rock for its trainer who had abandoned it. That Charmander waited for that trainer for days, nearly getting itself killed out of misplaced trust for him. Echoing this, Charmander is shown to have a lot of faith and trust in Ash, but with some prodding he also shows a little doubt. Squirtle is very mischievous and jokes around a lot, stemming from his previous identity as a gangster. Bulbasaur is very pessimistic and tends to assume the worst, which also works considering its backstory of abuse and abandonment. Ekans and Koffing are rather, how should I say this, simple-minded. This makes a little sense, seeing how Team Rocket's shenanigans are not always the brightest, but what's even more intriguing is their notion that there are no evil Pokemon in the world, just ones led to do bad things by their trainers. Simple though they are, all these Pokemon's newfound personalities are what make this episode not only memorable, but truly remarkable. At least for the first half. Yeah, the major problem with this particular episode is that it didn't play its trump card for long enough. Everyone recognizes it for getting to listen to Ash's Pokemon, but halfway through, that amazing potential just ends in favor of a much more standard and forgettable plot. Be honest, do you even remember what the climax of this episode was like? I know I sure didn't. If either the whole episode had focused on the Pokemon, or at least spread those parts out more evenly, I'd have little trouble calling this an incredible episode. As it is, it really is worth watching, just be prepared for a bit of a letdown. Pikachu Revolts. Going back to the Orange Islands for a moment, I really appreciate how the episodes in this season expected a bit more maturity out of their audience. I mean, it's not like they jacked up the age rating or anything, but I feel like there was an effort by the creators to give kids a little more to think on with the new season. For example, when Season 1 wanted to do a sad episode, they pulled every string possible to blast sad in the viewers' faces. This made for some episodes that were undeniably memorable, but had questionable quality in hindsight. Season 2 feels a bit more restrained, focusing on creating long-lasting quality work than immediate emotional appeal. When Season 1 did a spooky episode, they went to the default, ghosts in a haunted house making weird faces. Pretty silly in retrospect. But when the Orange Islands did their spooky episode, well, they actually succeeded. This episode begins with the gang arriving on Lapras to a city on Mandarin Island. Upon landing, they discover several Pokemon acting out against their trainers, a most unusual sight. When they go to try and help, however, some unseen force strikes Pikachu and Togepi, causing them to rebel in much the same way. So yeah, they're being possessed. Not even like hurdy-hur kid-friendly stuff, actual scary possession. Just that image of a beloved childhood icon turning against his trainer is infinitely more effective than anything Season 1 could ever put out. The gang theorized that a Psychic-type Pokemon is somehow causing this, since only a single Ghastly remains unaffected and Ghost types are strong against Psychic types. This theory is a bit far-fetched, considering that Ghastly is also part Poison, a type weak to Psychic attacks, but it's not totally unbelievable. Meanwhile, Jesse and James end up following the now-turned Meowth to a radio tower in the heart of the city, where they discover the culprits behind this attack. It turns out to be Cassidy and Butch, using a very well-trained Drowsy to hypnotize all Pokemon in the area.
Look at those moves!
They end up injured and taken to the Pokemon Center, where they agree to team up with Ash and company to stop this evil plan. And the episode carries on from there. In theory, this is a pretty standard story, but the disturbing overtones and clever execution make this episode a cut above the rest. There's the initial shock factor of Pikachu turning to the dark side, but the episode continues to escalate the stakes with Drowsy's increasing displays of power and manipulation. It's legitimately unsettling, especially upon your first viewing.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
This episode is almost like a checklist on all the things Season 2 did better than Season 1. But if you're looking for the magnum opus, you need only look a little farther on. Viva Las Lapras. After claiming victory against the Orange Islands champion, the gang are all traveling on Lapras when it steers suddenly off course. It turns out to have spotted the school of Lapras that it was separated from when Ash found it. However, unlike what you would expect, they behave hostilely towards Ash and the gang. Back in town, they find out that a band of poachers have been hunting down Lapras in the area, causing them to be afraid of humans. When they find the school again, they've been surrounded by the poachers and their tentacruel. Ash, Lapras, and Misty help to stop the poachers and free the school of Lapras from being killed. The Lapras all learn that some humans can still be trusted, the bad guys get put away, and Ash lets Lapras go to finally be back with its long-lost family. Alright, so now that we have that out of the way, let's get straight to the question that I imagine is on a lot of your minds. Why do I like this episode more than Pikachu's Goodbye or Bye Bye Butterfree? I know that a lot of people have very strong memories of those episodes, and they technically did come earlier than Viva Las Lapras, so the shock value of leaving a Pokemon behind had died down by then. However, in response, I'd like to present this argument. Those episodes were manipulative. Extremely so. Watch them again a little more critically, and you'll see that they used a lot of cheap tactics in order to get the response they wanted. And obviously it worked at the time, seeing how widely beloved those episodes are. Personally though, I'm looking for an episode that can still stir up the feels without stooping to a 3-minute long pop song or 7,000 crying shots. Viva Las Lapras succeeds in doing just that. Now granted, a short instrumental of The Time Has Come does play in the episode, but it's not nearly as drawn out as in Pikachu's Goodbye. It shows up, serves its purpose, and then leaves before it overstays its welcome. But more important than even that is the focus. Other episodes where Ash gives up a Pokemon tried to focus on making you sad and little else. This one, on the other hand, feels much more honest. It's not trying to make you cry, it's trying to make you feel good, and, in a strange way, proud of Lapras. I mean, just a short while ago, it was an infant washed up on the beach and separated from its family. Since then, it's traveled all across the region, becoming faster, stronger, and more compassionate. Now it's won a race against a highly trained Blastoise, battled a menacing Gengar to a draw, and bravely goaded a posse of Tentacruel in order to help its family. It's come a really long way. I recall the mysterious Mr. Enter at one point stating that most kids' cartoons aim to make their audience feel either happy or sad for the characters, and rarely step outside those bounds because they're simple and safe. He also said that, perhaps more so than any other emotion, pride is one of the most difficult to manufacture. To be proud of a character requires you to suspend your disbelief that they're fictional, and for you to have seen and appreciate a great growth in them. Now, the example he was talking about was a character who had seen a starring role in their respective cartoon for 3 full seasons. This episode managed to make me feel proud of a character who had only been around for 1 season and never even had a line of English dialogue. I don't know about you, but I can't think of anything that can top that. This has been the Phoenix King. Thank you all so much for your patience with me as I finish out the rest of the videos for Pokemon 2. I'll see you in the next one, and in the meantime, take care of yourselves.
We'll
Holy f***itor!